So I'm going to introduce John Siekmeier. He's here with us today from the great state of Minnesota. And let me get to his bio. John is an Isaac Walton League of America member of the Minnesota division. He's on the board, and he's also a professional engineer. He currently works for the Minnesota Department of Transportation and is a member of the American Society of Civil Engineers. He has over 30 years of pavement, foundation, and geotechnical engineering experience. John continues to actively work to restore native prairie and oak savanna on his own property in Minnesota. So I'll turn it over to you, John.
So thanks a lot for inviting me. I've already just learned a huge amount from the first couple speakers, so I'm certain I've already learned more than I'm going to contribute. But anyway, I'll share a little bit. And as it was mentioned, and I'm just crystal clear at the beginning, I'm certainly not speaking on behalf of the Minnesota Department of Transportation. So I'm here certainly as a volunteer, but I'm happy to answer whatever questions I can. But why don't we go to the next one there?
Yeah, I'm just trying to
Sure.
get the,
So here's here's sort of the objectives. Share what I can share from Minnesota. Listen to the questions, and you can just raise your hand if you want along the way, or we'll talk more later. And then just all together, I think we're determining next steps. Next slide. So
whoops.
that's good. Yep, you're good.
Okay.
So again, this is sort of the idea here. I'll talk about some opportunities I think we have, what we could be doing a little bit differently, what may be on the horizon. So I've got an example of a state statute it's a bill right now being considered in Minnesota that would help to sort of move the ball down the field there a little bit. And then just more discussion overall. Thanks. So by way of opportunities, there's at least three things, just three quick things that we can enhance the habitat. Also, I think, and roadway maintenance and roadway performance. So as I mentioned, my full-time job is all about trying to make our roads last longer. So I'm a road foundations engineer. The materials we use, how we design and build pavements. That's sort of it is my full-time job. So there are things that we could, related to this, how is this connected? Is that we, at least in Minnesota, the DOT, and I think this is true across the country, we are having a heck of a time hiring technicians, anybody related to construction. It's just a huge challenge. And so we just don't have the staff. Over the time I've been at the DOT, we're building, and so is Wisconsin, spending tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars building projects. And we do not have anywhere close to enough staff to actually are we spending this money wisely? And so this just gets me wound up. So we can't be having people sit on moors doing stuff that is really maybe not needed when we gotta have people watching these projects. That's my bottom line. So let's keep order. So of course, habitat, we'll all talk about habitat. I'm not gonna say anything more about habitat. This is just a lot of common sense stuff, I think. Next. So maintenance, what am I talking about? Here's just an example. So these are culverts, just examples of what, and again, I'm a soils guy. So it infuriates me that we don't maintain drainage around these roads. I mean, I'm not about digging ditches all over the world, but if we don't maintain the ditches along the roads, then the roads fall apart. Water is the enemy of everything that you're trying to build. So you gotta these are simple things, but I get this, we gotta have people, we only got so much staff. And if the maintenance people need to be focusing on at least things like this that are gonna make the roads last longer so we don't have to get in there and tear stuff up again, right? So this is just one example. We only got so many people, and we need to focus them on things that, at least in my estimation, are more important than recreational mowing. So, here's,
sorry.
no, it's good, you're right on time. So here's a performance example. Now, this, I don't have, next slide is more complicated, but let me just explain quickly. And this, I just used this earlier this week and on my engineering presentation. So what is this? In Minnesota, in every state in the country, the state DOTs are required by the federal government to track performance of the highway pavement somehow. And so on the left side of this graph is this ride quality. So in Minnesota, we do it on this 4-point scale, 1 to 4. 4 is good. If you're essentially smoothness. If you're at a 4, I mean you really can't get better than 4. But anyway, this is years across the bottom, right? So when we built this road in 2007, we built it at a 3.6, which is good. And this is again sort of stuff I try to promote. The DOT is doing it. We use really good construction. We use good materials. When we have a budget, we can do it. And that road lasts a long time. So the next slide, go ahead. This is sort of more typical. Again, it's more complicated here, but just the shape of that curve, if you remember how that looked, can you go back? Those first blue triangles, those are actual measurements every year of the smoothness of the pavement. You see that it hasn't really declined in 15 or 20 years. It's still like a skating rink. Well, not as smooth as skating rink.
Occasional pothole.
There's really no potholes in this. I drive, this is close to my house. This is like one of the best pavements in the state. Anyway, next one, this is more typical. And this is more typical of any road anywhere in the country. You got this decline, depending, but I mean, there's some kind of fall off. This is our sort of default curve for a traditional trunk highway in Minnesota. The idea is not to have this, the idea is to have all roads last longer so we don't have to go in there and rebuild them, okay? But that's why, for instance, the culverts, cleaning those things out. When we don't clean out the culverts and the ditch is filled with water, then the road foundation essentially rots, fills up with water, and then the pavement falls apart. They get potholes. So anyway, these things, at least in my brain, are tied together in my head. So we need to just utilize, it's not just about somehow costing the DOT more money with pollinators, it could be money plus if we focus the staff and the resources differently. So next, here's optimizing, so go ahead, next slide. This is really my thesis on this thing, is that we need to better utilize the staff that we already have, because we're not going to be hiring any more people. We need we're also, as safety was mentioned so much by our first speaker, and that is just a huge driving force with the state DOTs, no matter what, it's across the country. Safety is number one, the most important thing, both for the public and for the staff at the DOT. So all these things revolve around safety, and so we, for instance, my construction stuff, we are constantly trying to figure out how to keep our inspectors safer. How do we give them the jobs that they do? How can they be removed from unsafe situations, and how can we use their brain power better, and sort of a bunch of stuff I do with testing, kind of some archaic kind of a test that really is somehow not very relevant. We need to get away from just traditional stuff and do things that are effective. And I think that was the theme, a lot of the theme from the prior speaker, talking about let's just look a little harder at what chemicals are we using, what's the timing. Let's get into a little bit into the details and do things that make more sense and aren't just what's on the calendar. And then just, that's good, you're okay. So these are actually again, I just used these slides last week for my own talks at the DOT. Good practices, we only got so many people. So maintaining getting out there with a grader and maintaining the surface means that the road lasts longer. You only got so many people. If they're sitting on a mower, they're not grading the road. And so this other is a test. This is a soil gravel test that we use at the DOTs. Again, it's sort of fast, and it's makes more sense, and it makes whatever. There's a whole bunch of stuff that this test is replaces traditional things that we've been doing for 75 years that took half an hour. This takes 5 minutes. So there's reasons to do things that are both driven by practicality and I don't know, it seems like common sense, and also engineering best practice. Next.
Sometimes it cooperates, sometimes it doesn't. Here.
So here's this on the horizon stuff. So in Minnesota, as I mentioned, I work for the DOT, but I've become really interested in the legislature and the ability to try to fix some stuff with statutes. And so this all started out in my world of pavement performance, because I had essentially my representatives were like, how can we make this better? Can't we pass some kind of law? I don't know. So anyway, we've worked on it. But this is a statute now related to roadside habitats and pollinators. This has been proposed now for several years in Minnesota, and it's coming back. I'm going to meet in a couple of weeks to talk about what could happen this next session. So this is on you can just Google that number. I can provide you different links, but I mean, if you put that number into Google Minnesota, Google will find it, give you the bill. But anyway, this is essentially most of that bill is here. Let's just go to the next. What is this? What is the idea here? So this only applies, again, the commissioner here is the commissioner of the DOT. So this would require that the Minnesota Department of Transportation on their highways. And so again, the situation is different who does it, I guess, is different in Minnesota versus Wisconsin, because here now I will understand that the counties do all the maintenance on the trunk highways in Wisconsin, which I didn't know until just today. But anyway, it's not true in Minnesota, but so we have this statute kind of makes it certainly applies to Minnesota at the moment. It could work here too. But what this statute does, it only applies to the trunk highways. So it doesn't mandate anything on the local governments. Now that's been talked about. Wisconsin could do it different, but in Minnesota, we've as a first step in this process, it's been determined to be, and I believe this is true, much easier for the state legislature to tell the state DOT what to do. As soon as the legislature wants to tell the counties what to do, that's always not very easy. And that's fine with me, so let's stick with the DOT. So that's what this does. It says the commissioner will, on the trunk highways, do these things. That's just the approach strategically that's been taken in Minnesota.
Now I'll save my question, so I was just wondering if there's a date tied to this.
Yes, it would, well, as soon as it passes, essentially it would, if this was to say that they take this on and I think we convene in January 2023, if this actually got passed during those first months, it could go into effect by July 1st of 2023, or they could put some other date on it.
Right, okay.
But it could be that fast. Because this would be, we've been talking about this for years, so there would be no reason to say, oh, we gotta wait. No. Anyway, here's the idea. So it's about this plan, but the plan does have, this has substantial teeth that don't exist now. Because we don't even do this now. That's why that's why it requires a new statute to make sure this happens. But what this says is that on the trunk highways, on the state highways, the Wisconsin or, either way, Wisconsin or Minnesota, you have to do this on trunk highways. So even though here, even if the Wisconsin DOT outsources all their maintenance work to the counties, I guess it still all completely applies, because the policies would be driven by a statute, the counties would, when they signed their contract, they would just do it. Just like when our first speaker was saying, you know, the state hands down this July 15th date, he just lives with it. Okay. So anyway, what does this do? Measure, enhance, restore. These are all the same. Every one of these numbers here is going to be talking about measurement, some kind of change that's desired, and then some what to measure. So it says, you know, measure acres, and then this is of the right of way. So I don't know, Minnesota, we own all kinds of stuff that we don't even we don't need it anymore. It's sitting out there. So get it out of the right of way, get it into either, give it to the DNR, give it to the counties, do something, but get it back to prairie lands, wetlands, or recreational land. Next one, measure, reduce pesticide. Oh, sorry, not you.
Never mind.
So pesticides, other chemicals. So again, yet we don't just measure this. We don't even know how much we're using at the moment. Greenhouse gases. Again, we're conscious of this. We have policies in place that said DOT will. We have policies that say this, but it seems to not apply to mowers. Next slide.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
Sorry.
I have had my coffee.
Also, so energy consumption. Again, this is all driven by climate change. We have policies at the highest levels of the DOT say we're gonna reduce energy. Well, then why are we mowing all this ground that we don't have to mow? Financial penalties related to environmental damage, worker safety violations, related to mowing. And now I think we're gonna add brushing to this statute because that kind of was, didn't occur to us at the time, but I think we'll just add the word brushing so there was no confusion. And then the last thing is very similar again, environmental damage, the number of instances. So the first one is this happens. Unfortunately, when people get injured or whether it's whatever, we're responsible. Obviously, these are employees. This costs us. It's not just the health of the employee; it costs money. And so we have to care about the people themselves, and we have to be aware of the budget, the impact, and this costs. I don't know yet because we don't have this pulled out, but we certainly know when the DOT knows, related to my world, when we impact with construction the public, there are accidents or there are staff killed or injured. Every year we try to reduce those numbers, not because of the people, but also because this costs millions of dollars. And so, anyway, that's I think I'm about done here. So here's sort of the wrapping it up for the statute. They have to do this, and also what this letter. No, I see that that's the letter, the paragraph. Okay, so the last thing, collaboration with the public. So all this, everything that was described here is only whatever, it's been worked on for a couple of years, but there's certainly, collaboration, any of these targets, any of those measures this requires iteration constantly with the public, so that any new measure, those are just sort of buckets to put the measures in. The actual, details are in collaboration with the public, which is everybody not part of the DOT. That's you guys, that's industry, that's whoever. Collaboration has to be an interactive process to adjust that statute, or what's driven, what that statute drives, the actual measures, the actual numbers, the details. Next. And so here's what would happen annually. Every year then, the DOT will have to create this could be a very simple report, because it's just bang, 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 here's what we're doing, here's what we're measuring. This should be a very brief thing every year. And then I think a key thing that we've discovered is that the last sentence, it needs to be signed by an engineer. Okay, now, I know I'm an engineer, you might think I'm biased, but the thing about engineers they're licensed. And so our license, we have the engineer, I mean, it's, well, you know, doctors have a license, we know this, right? You ethically, professionally, our license is incredibly, the bar is very high. And it doesn't, the engineer, this license, the board that controls the licensing has huge amounts of discretion. And so this is, you know, an engineer cannot, just like a doctor, it's not, you don't go in front of a, you know, a judge and a jury with the doctor. Or like, you have a group of your peers that look at whatever is on the table, and you better have the highest, most important criteria for an engineer or a doctor is the people, the public. That's it, number one. There's other things on the list. But if anything, so anyway, that's why this is, you know, this all is, to me, that's what the legislature really has discovered, is that they have, and this is related to DOT work, essentially, or the other departments, that these statutes used to say the commissioner, you know, will sign it, or somebody will sign it. Well, that turns out to be almost meaningless, because the agencies they can just essentially get nothing done. But if an engineer has to sign this report, that person's license is on the line. And so that's why this is like this. We've actually got similar statutes now that have been passed, and this is going to be a game changer, I think. And it's been a frustration because we've had not that all these other people aren't important, planners, all kinds of people, but they do not have a licensing board. They do not have a license. They will lose their license if they do not act in the public interest. And so anyway, that's just super critical here. I think we're done. Maybe what's last? Okay, so now we're back to whatever questions or discussion. That's just that's either now or during lunch or whenever. So thanks for listening.
Does anybody have a specific question? I know this is already John's information provides a nice segue to our next speaker, Lori Schneider, with the Pollinator Alliance, but I just want to say that you know, each one of our speakers has made some light bulbs go off for me, and I think you're exactly right. There has to be, you know, the full circle has to happen. There has to be a responsible party. There has to be somebody that has to check off on the plan and certify it, or make sure that it's being, you know, the planting or the mowing or the chemical application is happening in a way that makes sense. And you know, I liked your term recreational mowing, because I think we've all seen a lot of that, and I know Maureen and I have talked a lot about that even in Pierce County here. I live on 810th Street in Trimble Township, and I've lived there for 27 years and have seen like just a crazy amount of recreational mowing, you know, increasing every year, where people mow the ditches or roadsides to the nub. You know, it's like to within an inch of their life, just for fun, because they think it looks beautiful. And I feel, this is my little soapbox, but I feel as a taxpayer, over 27 years, I've spent thousands of dollars supporting supporting the management of the roadsides in my township, and I don't approve of what's happening there. So I think we all have to, you know, make our voices heard and hold our representatives and people that are doing the work accountable. So that's my personal opinion. But any further thoughts, John, or does anyone else have questions for John?
Well, thanks again for listening.
Yeah, thank you.